You know, life has a strange way of throwing surprises at you when you least expect it. And sometimes those surprises come wrapped not in shiny paper or tied with ribbons, but in words that cut straight to your heart. Words so simple, yet so powerful, that they leave you frozen in disbelief. And that is exactly what happened to me on my birthday when my grandfather, the man I had always known as distant, reserved, and sometimes even a little intimidating, looked at me across the dinner table, leaned back in his chair, gave me a slow smile, and said in his calm but commanding voice, "Is the apartment comfortable?" A question that seemed harmless on the surface, but carried with it the weight of an unimaginable revelation, because until that moment, I had no idea what he was talking about, no idea that he had orchestrated something behind the scenes that would change my life forever. And the silence that followed his question was so thick that I could hear the clinking of silverware from the other end of the table, the faint hum of the chandelier above us, and even the pounding of my own heart, as the words sank in, while everyone else at the table turned their heads toward me with wide eyes and expectant expressions, waiting to see my reaction, because they already knew something I didn't. They knew that my grandfather, a man whose wealth had always been whispered about but never directly discussed in our family, had pulled off something extraordinary, something that made my birthday not just another celebration but the beginning of a story I never thought I'd live to tell. And as I sat there blinking in confusion, trying to piece together the meaning of his question, a wave of emotions washed over me: shock, disbelief, excitement, and an almost childlike wonder, because for someone like me, who had grown up modestly despite having a billionaire grandfather, the idea that he had just casually dropped a bombshell about an apartment that was apparently mine felt like stepping into a dream so vivid that I was afraid to wake up. But at the same time, deep down, I knew this was real, and that realization alone was enough to make my birthday one of the most unforgettable nights of my entire life, a night where a single question changed the trajectory of everything I thought I knew about family, love, and the hidden ways people show they care, even if they don't say it out loud for years. And as I tried to speak, my voice caught in my throat, my eyes darted from my grandfather to my parents, and then to the faces of cousins who looked at me with a mix of envy and awe. And suddenly it felt as if the walls of the grand dining room, decorated with flowers and golden lights, were closing in on me, reminding me that the weight of his words carried not just a gift, but a responsibility, one that I had to embrace whether I was ready for it or not. Because when a billionaire grandfather gives you something so monumental, it is never just about the material possession. It is about the message behind it, the silent acknowledgement that you are being trusted with something far greater than you can see at that moment. And in that instant, I realized my life had taken a turn I would never have imagined, even in my wildest dreams. The moment those words left his lips, I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, like the very foundation of who I thought I was had been quietly rewritten without my knowledge. And while the others around the table smiled knowingly, I sat frozen, trying to process what exactly my grandfather meant, because for years I had grown up believing that while he was wealthy, even unimaginably so, his fortune was a world far removed from my own, locked away in corporate empires, investment portfolios, and towering office buildings that I had only seen in magazines. And never once did I expect him to reach across that distance and place a tangible piece of it directly into my life. Yet here he was, on my birthday of all days, asking me if the apartment he had arranged for me was comfortable, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if gifting an entire home, a space that could change the way a person lived forever, was the same as handing over a neatly wrapped box containing a wristwatch or a pair of shoes. And as I struggled to respond, my mind raced back over the years, recalling every interaction I had with him, trying to see if there had been clues, subtle hints that perhaps I had missed, but nothing came to mind. No conversations about apartments, no hints dropped in passing, no winks from my parents suggesting something grand was waiting in the shadows. And that realization made his words even more overwhelming, because they were not only a surprise but also a carefully kept secret, hidden from me until this precise moment when he had decided that I was ready to hear it. And as I glanced at him, his expression was calm, yet unreadable, the kind of look only a man who had mastered the art of controlling his emotions could, where both his eyes gave away a glimmer of warmth, a softness that I had rarely seen in him, almost as if he had been waiting for this day with quiet anticipation. And suddenly the tension in the room seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on me as my cousins exchanged whispers and my parents avoided my gaze, their smiles betraying the fact that they had known all along and had chosen to stay silent, allowing my grandfather the honor of revealing his gift in his own way. And the realization that everyone but me had been in on this secret only made the moment more surreal, because it felt like I had been living in one reality while everyone else had been living in another. And now, on this night, the two worlds had collided, leaving me standing at the intersection of disbelief and gratitude, my heart pounding faster than ever before, my hands growing clammy as I reached for the glass of water in front of me, trying to steady myself. And yet, deep within, beneath the whirlwind of confusion and awe, there was a growing flame of curiosity, a desire to know more, to understand not just what this apartment was, or where it was located, but why he had chosen this moment, this birthday, to bestow upon me something so extraordinary, and whether it was merely an act of generosity, or something deeper, something that spoke of lessons he wanted me to learn, values he wanted me to embrace, or responsibilities he wanted me to carry, because when it comes to a man like my grandfather, nothing is ever random, nothing is ever without purpose. And so I found myself sitting there, staring at him, searching for answers in the quiet strength of his posture, while the rest of the family leaned in, waiting for the next words, the next revelation that would undoubtedly peel back yet another layer of this mystery. And though my mouth was dry and my voice felt trapped somewhere deep within, I finally managed to whisper a hesitant, almost trembling reply. "What apartment, Grandpa?" Words that broke the silence and set in motion a chain of explanations, stories, and confessions that would unravel the carefully woven fabric of secrets surrounding this gift, revealing not just the existence of a place I never knew was mine, but also the legacy of a man whose way of showing love was not in hugs or gentle words, but in grand gestures designed to last far beyond his lifetime. The air in the dining room seemed to shift the very moment I asked him that trembling question, "What apartment, Grandpa?" Because those 4 words opened a door that had clearly been waiting to be opened for a long time. And as his smile deepened just slightly, his gaze locked with mine in a way that felt both reassuring and intimidating, almost as if he had been waiting for me to finally acknowledge the reality he had been preparing for me. And slowly, with the calm authority of a man who had spent his entire life making decisions that shaped empires, he leaned forward and began to speak, telling me that months ago he had arranged for a luxury apartment in the heart of the city to be placed under my name, a place he had chosen carefully after years of watching me grow, after quietly observing the struggles I had endured as I tried to find independence, balance, and a sense of belonging in a world where I often felt overshadowed by the achievements of others in the family. And as he spoke, his words were both heavy and comforting, because they carried the weight of his wealth, the kind of wealth that could easily alter the course of someone's life, but also the rare tenderness of a grandfather who, despite his stern exterior, had been paying closer attention to me than I ever realized, noticing the nights I stayed late studying, the times I came to family gatherings looking tired from juggling work and responsibilities, the moments when I tried to smile despite feeling out of place, and I felt my throat tighten as his voice echoed in my ears, explaining that this apartment was not just a gift, but an opportunity, a foundation upon which I could build my future, free from the constant worries of rent, landlords, or unstable living conditions. And as he described it in detail, the high ceilings, the panoramic windows that overlooked the skyline, the furnishings he had ensured were both modern and comfortable, even down to the library he had filled with books he thought might inspire. MIT began to dawn on me that this was no casual gift. It was a carefully planned gesture of love disguised as practicality, something only a man like him could conceive, because while others might buy you a birthday cake or a watch, my grandfather had given me a new chapter of life, one I hadn't even known I was stepping into. And though my cousins tried to mask their envy with polite smiles, I could see the flicker in their eyes, the quiet disbelief that he had chosen me, of all people, to receive such a monumental gift. And while part of me felt guilty for being the one singled out, another part of me, a small but growing flame inside, felt seen for the first time in years, felt valued in a way that words had never managed to capture. And as I listened, hanging on every detail he shared, I realized that this wasn't only about comfort or luxury, it was about legacy. It was about him telling me without directly saying it that he trusted me with something that carried his name, his effort, and his story, and in that moment I felt the weight of his entire life pressing into my own, urging me to rise, to become someone worthy of the faith he was showing in me. And though tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, I tried to hold them back, unwilling to show too much emotion, in a room full of watchful relatives, but inside, my heart was bursting with gratitude, confusion, and a strange new sense of responsibility, because gifts like these were never free of expectations, and even if he never voiced them aloud, I knew deep down that he had given me this not simply to make me comfortable, but to challenge me, to test whether I could carry the weight of such generosity without losing myself. And as he continued to speak, explaining how the apartment was already legally mine, how the keys were waiting in a velvet box that would be handed to me before the night ended, I felt as though my entire world had been rewritten in the span of a few sentences. And I sat there, wondering how my life would look tomorrow, next week, next year, when I stepped through the doors of a place I hadn't even seen yet, a place that was meant to be mine, a place that was no longer just a home but a symbol of a bond I never thought I had with the man I had always admired from afar. After my grandfather's calm revelation, the rest of dinner felt like a blur, because though conversations carried on around the table, though laughter rose from one corner and glasses clinked in toasts from another, my mind was spinning in circles, replaying his words over and over again, trying to grasp the enormity of what had just been handed to me. And yet, beneath that whirlwind of emotions, I could feel the weight of everyone else's eyes on me, especially my cousins, who had always seen themselves as the rightful heirs to his fortune, who had always measured their worth against the empire he built. And though they tried to mask it with polite smiles, I could sense the quiet envy brewing just beneath their skin, could see it in the stiffness of their shoulders and the way their laughter came out a little too forced. And that awareness filled me with a strange unease, because while I had not asked for this gift, while I had not expected it in the slightest, I knew that in receiving it, I had unintentionally stepped into a silent rivalry that had been simmering in the background for years, one I had never wanted any part of, but now had no choice but to confront. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this apartment was more than just a place to live. It was a statement, a declaration from my grandfather that he saw something in me worth investing in, worth protecting. And though I felt humbled by that trust, I also felt the invisible storm of family politics beginning to gather on the horizon. And when the evening finally drew to a close, when dessert plates had been cleared and guests began to drift toward the door, my grandfather summoned me quietly into his study, where the heavy oak shelves and the faint smell of leather and old books seemed to swallow us in their timelessness. And there, without the watchful eyes of relatives, he opened a drawer, pulled out a small velvet box, and placed it in my hands, his gaze steady, his voice low but firm as he said, "This is yours now. What you do with it will say more about who you are than anything you've ever said." And I felt my hands tremble as I opened the box to see the glinting silver keys resting inside. Keys that suddenly seemed heavier than metal, carrying with them not just the weight of responsibility but the unspoken challenge of proving myself. And as I looked up, he gave me a single nod, a gesture that carried both pride and warning, before dismissing me gently with the assurance that a driver would take me to see the apartment tomorrow. And that night, as I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the keys resting on my nightstand, I could hardly breathe from the rush of questions that filled my mind. What would it look like? Would it feel like home, or would it feel like a gilded cage? A place I was grateful for but constantly reminded me of the pressure to live up to expectations. And when morning came, I dressed with trembling hands, met the driver waiting outside, and was driven into the heart of the city, where the streets buzzed with life, neon lights flickered against glass towers, and the world felt larger than ever, until finally, the car pulled up in front of a towering high-rise that seemed to touch the sky, its sleek design casting a shadow of quiet dominance over the street below. And as I stepped out, my heart hammered so loudly that I could hear it in my ears, because this was the moment where the gift stopped being abstract and became real, where words transformed into walls and keys opened doors. And as the doorman greeted me with a warmth that suggested he already knew who I was, I stepped into the grand lobby with its marble floors and golden chandeliers, feeling simultaneously like an imposter and like someone who had been chosen for something greater. And when the elevator doors opened and I was carried upward, floor after floor, until finally it stopped at the very top, the doors sliding open to reveal a space that took my breath away. I froze in the doorway, unable to move, because the apartment stretched out before me like something from a dream, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the skyline, the sunlight spilling across polished wooden floors, the rooms furnished with a balance of elegance and warmth that spoke of careful thought. And as I walked through it slowly, my fingers brushing against the velvet couch, the sleek countertops, the shelves lined with books chosen with uncanny precision, I realized that every detail had been curated, not just to impress, but to reflect me, my tastes, my struggles, my growth. And I felt a lump rise in my throat because it was then I understood that this was not only a gift, it was my grandfather's way of saying he knew me better than I had ever believed, that he had been watching all along, and that this space was his way of telling me that I mattered, not just to him, but to the legacy he would one day leave behind. And as I stood by the window, staring out at the endless city, the keys still clutched in my hand, I felt both the thrill of possibility and the heavy shadow of responsibility, knowing that this apartment was not just a home but a crossroads, a place where my choices would echo louder than ever before. That night, after wandering through every corner of the apartment until my legs ached and my mind swirled with disbelief, I sat by the vast window overlooking the city, the lights below blinking like constellations scattered across the earth, and I tried to wrap my head around the enormity of what had just unfolded in my life. Because only a day earlier I had woken up in my modest room, thinking my birthday would pass with the usual rituals of cake and laughter, never suspecting that my grandfather, the man I had always seen as distant and almost untouchable, would reveal a depth of care and intention that completely shattered the walls I had built around how I understood him. And as I sat there, clutching the keys that still felt heavier than anything I had ever held, I realized that this apartment was more than stone, glass, and wood. It was a conversation. A silent but profound message from him that said, "I see you, I believe in you, and I am giving you not just comfort, but a foundation upon which you can build the life you deserve." And as tears slid down my cheeks, unrestrained this time because no one was there to witness them, I thought about how easily I could have misjudged him all these years, mistaking his stoicism for indifference, when in reality, perhaps his love had always been expressed in ways larger than words, in ways that took time to understand. And I felt a wave of guilt for every moment I had doubted whether he cared, because now, staring at the skyline from a place I could call my own, I knew with certainty that his love had always been there, only hidden beneath layers of pride, discipline, and a lifetime of carrying responsibilities I could barely comprehend. Yet, even as that realization warmed my heart, another shadow crept in, the shadow of my family's shifting dynamics, because I could already sense the resentment brewing among my cousins, their whispered conversations when they thought I wasn't listening, their glances that lingered too long on the keys in my hand, and I knew this gift had placed me in the middle of a silent war, one I had never asked to fight, but one I would have to navigate carefully if I wanted to keep both the gift and the fragile ties of family intact. And in that moment, as I thought about the future, I promised myself that I would not let the apartment become a weapon in that war, that I would use it wisely, not to flaunt or to boast, but to grow into the kind of person my grandfather believed I could be, someone who didn't just inherit wealth but learned to carry it with humility, integrity, and strength. And as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the apartment slowly became more than just a luxurious space. It became a mirror of my journey, a place where I wrestled with doubts, faced envy, built resilience, and began to shape an identity that was not defined by the size of the gift but by how I chose to live within it. And though the path ahead was uncertain, though challenges with my family loomed larger than ever, I carried within me the memory of that night, of his calm smile and his question, "Is the apartment comfortable?" A question so deceptively simple, yet filled with layers of meaning that I would spend years unraveling. And every time I turned the key in the door, every time I stepped inside and felt the quiet embrace of a home that was mine, I heard his voice again, steady, patient, loving in its own stern way, reminding me that sometimes the greatest gifts are not just about what they give us, but about the faith they show in who we are becoming. And I knew then that my life had been changed forever, not because I now lived in luxury, but because for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, chosen, and trusted, and that was a gift no one could ever take away.